if you're tying regional security dialogue and its success to major political breakthroughs, diplomatic breakthroughs, it's going to fail. And so the starting point for, I think, my own thinking, it's born of pessimism, but trying to be practical within that overall pessimistic frame to think about what are the things that might have material impact on the lives and security of citizens of the region.
This is episode number 9 of the TCF World podcast. On this episode of TCF World, Michael Wahid Hanna and I are talking about security architecture in the Middle East. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Thanasi. Good to be with you today.
Welcome to the podcast. So today we're talking about a subject that you have been working on with a lot of intensity over the last couple of years, and the occasion for our conversation is the launching this month, January of 2018, of a gargantuan project called Order from Ashes: New Foundations for Security in the Middle East. And this is a comprehensive study that you've organized into this really pivotal question. You've brought together more than 15 researchers. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to explain the genesis and rationale for doing this and what the point of this whole research is and why it's important. But first, just give us an overview. What is regional security architecture, and what are we doing in this Order from Ashes project?
Well, so regional security architecture looks different in different places. In some regions, it is formalized and represents institutions that are quite robust and have various kinds of norms and practices. In others, it is more informal and takes the form of various kinds of dialogue. But in any event, all of these, whether they are informal or formal, they represent systems that emerge or established in regions. They can take the form of practices, relations between states, more formalized alliances, and in the most kind of robust form, with the establishment of institutions. And all of this is with the end of either preventing conflict, managing conflict, but enhancing security. And most often we see this at the regional level. We have multiple examples. We don't have such examples, however, in the Middle East, which is the start of this project.
And to be clear, when we talk about security architecture, we're not talking about literal security architecture like a network of military bases. And this is, I think, important because for me, this was a hard concept to grasp. We're also not talking about things like NATO. Is that right?
That is right. So NATO is a kind of classic example of a collective security organization. And when we're talking about regional security architecture, we're focusing on cooperative security. So not a kind of defense or military alliance, but instead a kind of network of relationships within a region that are aimed at conflict prevention, confidence building, ensuring security more broadly, as opposed to a kind of military alliance. There's, fundamentally distinct endeavors.
So this gets us to the nub of the problem in the Middle East. I guess uniquely among regions in the world, the Middle East lags behind all other parts of the world in security architecture. Describe a little bit what kind of landscape we're talking about, and maybe can you start venture an explanation as to why this region is so far out of whack with the rest of the world?
Well, in some sense, it shouldn't come as a total surprise, because if we look at the economic landscape, the Middle East is perhaps the least economically integrated region in the world, with the kind of sole exception of the GCC states, which have had some success in terms of economic integration, um, there's very little trade happening within the region. And so, as a starting point, those are not auspicious signals as to how effective you're going to be at the security level. And so, from there, we have a region that has traditionally been beset by rivalries and competition among states for leadership. We have a region that has not been unified by a common existential threat that could overcome some of that regional competition. We've had a great deal of external intervention that I think, particularly in more recent decades, has inhibited regional efforts in the realm of security. Many countries have looked outside the region to anchor their security, as opposed to looking internally.
This is an interesting paradox because in other places or other moments of history, widespread conflict has ended up generating security architecture, or in places like Europe, even more secure collective security arrangements. How is it that the post-colonial Middle East? I mean, you say the lack of a unifying threat. How does that play out against the backdrop of a common experience of the colonial period and decolonization, and then a common experience of war with Israel since 1948? How come that it didn't lead to some kind of unifying or sort of focusing energy?
Well, the story of Arab fracture and the lack of Arab unanimity with respect to the Arab Israeli conflict is probably beyond the scope of this humble podcast. But the Arab Israeli conflict has had a role in shaping that security environment. There is no post Arab Israeli conflict. I mean, that has become a structural feature of the region. And the region has never gotten beyond the conflict. Now, it has decreased in its centrality to the politics and security dynamics of the region, but it's never gone away. And there are quite critical non Arab parties, namely Israel, Iran, and Turkey, who are outside the kind of common language area of the Arab world, but who are key players. In fact, some of the strongest states in the region, and that has added another layer of complexity, particularly with respect to Israel and now with Iran, in terms of how to have a functioning regional security dialogue when you have these abiding divides that really inhibit or undermine the possibility for dialogue.
So, in a parallel universe, if there had been a let's say a unified response to Israel, that might have accelerated the formation of some kind of security architecture, or if we had a scenario where Iran versus all the Arab states collectively, that might again have elicited a different sort of institutional development. But what's unique in this region in the last, is really in the entire era since the end of World War II, is that there's been almost an unhealthy pluralism of rival security coalitions, so that there's never been a long and enduring coherent group of states that have been on one side or the other of political divides, and that has effectively prevented the development of the kinds of even weak security architecture that we see in regions like Asia.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if we look at the at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and the African Union, um, we see much more robust architecture that has evolved over time, and there just aren't those kinds of parallel processes in the Middle East to date.
So let's get into the sort of genesis of this project. How do you see, first of all, how does this question of security architecture fit in to the broader question of human security and political the development of political rights and of a more representative or better governed framework for countries in the Middle East?
So, by way of background, we together co-edited a previous volume called "Arab Politics Beyond the Uprisings" that looked more closely at politics in the region in this post-uprisings environment. And a lot of those studies were focused on really country specific conditions, but looking at politics more broadly. But thinking about uh, what were perhaps some overlooked political drivers. Um, and when we conceived of this project, we wanted to, in parallel or in conjunction, think slightly more detached, more broadly, in terms of the regional security trends that obviously are linked, but one can think about them separately as well. And that's where this idea originated. And it was clear at the time when we thought about this project that uh, this lack of architecture was an exacerbating feature, something that aggravated existing problematic trends, and at the same time, because the security environment was so bleak, we thought that this was a good time to at least think proactively about what kinds of things might be possible. Not the grand visions of a kind of regional security end state in institutional terms, but perhaps a more practical look at things that can make things at least incrementally better. And that's a good chunk of this research is about just that.
Here we're talking about a region where really bizarre things have become normal. Like Lebanon, where I live, is still in a state officially of hot war with Israel since 1948. There isn't even at this point a ceasefire in place. So even though the most recent war between these two countries ended in 2006, there isn't even officially a ceasefire, which isn't just a rhetorical problem. It leads to the perpetual threat of the smallest skirmish or misunderstanding along the tense border erupting into outright war. And this is rather than an anomaly. This is typical. We have, in the Gulf, Iran and Saudi Arabia don't even have the kind of minimal communications channels that even the Soviet Union and the United States had with each other at the height of the Cold War, and a state of aggravation between Israel and even the Arab countries that have made peace deals with it creates gaps over everything from managing threats in the Sinai to the wider inability to have like regional meetings over even non-contentious issues like water management or containing fallout from nuclear accidents or the other kinds of regimes of say cooperation that end up in other places leading to security architecture. This is what we're talking about from the sort of biggest things where there's no such thing as like a regional peacekeeping force to the smallest things where there's not even a forum where one can talk about nuclear waste, civilian nuclear waste, or nuclear power, or managing garbage and contaminants and things like this. So what is on the table? What's plausible in this kind of broken environment?
Well, some of the previous attempts to broach these topics have failed for some of the reasons you just mentioned, that the lack of major diplomatic breakthrough. And so, in the post Madrid era, as part of that process, the Madrid peace talks, there was an attempt to launch an arms control and regional security dialogue. And it failed when the peace process failed. And so we saw a kind of similar problem with attempts to talk about a nuclear weapons free zone in the Middle East. And so, if you're tying regional security dialogue and its success to major political breakthroughs, diplomatic breakthroughs, it's going to fail. And so the starting point for, I think, my own thinking and what shaped, I think, the nature of this volume is that we aren't going to have any of those major political breakthroughs. There's not going to be a two-state solution. There isn't going to be a major Iranian-Saudi rapprochement that fundamentally alters the regional security dynamics, such that we have a kind of new opportunity for institution building. And so it's born of pessimism, but trying to be practical within that overall pessimistic frame to think about what are the things that might have material impact on the lives and security of citizens of the region. And some of these things like incidents at sea agreement can be the difference between professional management of flashpoints and crises that, if left unchecked, might lead to something much more drastic, and in the worst case scenario, war. Dealing with nuclear waste, securing nuclear facilities, a kind of lowest common denominator agenda for the region that might even be able to overcome enmity. Not asking belligerents to, in fact, engage with their enemies per se, but at least putting together a kind of lowest common denominator agenda that at the same time can have real impact on human security, on regional security. And so that's really the kind of, and particularly the last section of this volume is focused on those kinds of endeavors.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I really liked about the studies that came together here. I mean, so there's 15 different studies which we're going to release online on the Century Foundation's website, tcf.org, and then starting now in January, and then we're going to publish them collectively as a edited volume in March. And what binds most of these studies together is the idea that you were just talking about, which is that seismic shifts are unlikely or impossible, but there's still some real utility in tackling piecemeal locally in one country or another, in one subregion or another, small levels of, let's say, conflict or just common threat management. And one of the things that I found really sort of striking and useful about these studies is that they all take into account that most of these problems are fundamentally political as well as security problems. So we're talking about things that affect the way people live. They affect sometimes life or death, sometimes quality of life. They relate to governance and political choices, and their security problems. There's no sense in considering the security element in isolation, but there is utility, or there can be utility, at least in some of the cases that we studied here, in tackling things that can be tackled in the absence of a more meaningful political discussion. So I mean, you refer to incidents at sea, which is a great example of a level on which maybe you could get Iran and the Arab Gulf states to talk to each other, or Qatar and its currently estranged neighbors, without waiting for a political rapprochement that might never come.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we shouldn't forget that in real life ways, the United States is a party to these happenings. And something like an incidents at sea agreement might actually have real bearing on U.S. military engagement with the region and the way that it conducts itself. I think your chapter on UNIFIL is quite instructive in terms of um, uh, the design of preventative channels of communication that are inherently limited, but despite those limitations, have real utility. And a channel that cannot overcome any of that of the political dysfunction that creates the conflict to begin with. But that kind of useful management might be the difference between maybe not even the escalation of full blown war, but at least thwarting escalatory dynamics before they reach a more dangerous stage. So maybe you want to take a second to talk about that.
This is a common thread of a lot of what we looked at when it comes to security architecture. Basically, in this case, you have two belligerents, Hezbollah and Israel, who wouldn't ever dream of direct negotiations over anything over one of the most dangerous borders in the region. And there's a UN mission that's been in place for decades, and since 2006 has effectively acted as a mediator between Hezbollah and Israel, and it's been within limits, very effective at preventing unintended escalations to war. And in the event of another war, it probably will have other humanitarian benefits in terms of negotiating evacuation of civilians and other things that are good in an overall bad situation. What UNIFIL can't do is substitute for a political process. So, what really needs to happen is some kind of negotiation that leads to a permanent ceasefire, and, down the road, there are even more ambitious political settlements one could imagine that would lead to some kind of sustainable peace along this border. And a security architecture framework doesn't even begin to address that. And we've actually seen, again, with UNIFIL, there was several efforts where UNIFIL tried to serve as sort of the leading edge, to sort of sneak in negotiations over more contentious issues. And they actually had some very fruitful conversations between proxies for Hezbollah and proxies for Israel over long-running border disputes. But once those questions were kicked over to the political arena, nothing ever came of it. And that's the sort of a story writ large throughout the region, which is that technical management of conflicts, whether it's negotiations, conflict mitigation, conflict management, are important because they help people live better, or can help people live better. They do not substitute for an absent political process, and for the sort of lack of integration that we opened up this conversation with you talking about, the lack of economic and political integration, the lack of substantial dialogue between states, even friendly states, and it's a real red flag about security, or the limits of security architecture, to look at the conflict in the Gulf, right? That even the subset of like-minded Arab Gulf monarchies that live off of similar petro economies can still fracture between themselves, like the Saudi coalition did against Qatar, and it sort of suggests if those states can't have a sort of functional GCC as a security architecture, one should have very limited expectations about efforts elsewhere.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And as you mentioned about UNIFIL, they UNIFIL as a mediating channel cannot overcome the intent to go to war. So if either side is intent on going to war, that's a kind of political military decision that is beyond the realm of that kind of mediation. But unintended escalation, which often is not necessarily a kind of top level political process, and it is in that realm of prevention that I think there is scope for proactive efforts, and You mentioned the Gulf, obviously, as a kind of signifier of failure on this front, and yet even within this, again, this very bleak security landscape, I do think there is a shift in thinking in the region in the sense that even status quo powers are now re-examining their security posture. They're re-examining their sense of threat. They're thinking more concertedly about regional security. And as we've often mentioned in our own conversations, the end result of some of that rethinking has often been quite negative. It's been a net negative for regional security. But there is a different kind of dynamism, often again, oftentimes quite negative. But there is, I think, the possibility for openings to at least introduce new ideas to the regional agenda, because I do think this moment is quite different.
So one last thing I want to touch on before we close. Your understanding of the role the United States has played in harming rather than helping the formation of security architecture. Could you just quickly explain how you see that? Because I think that, I mean, that is something that might surprise some of our listeners who are accustomed to thinking of the United States as providing this beneficent security umbrella over the Gulf as a result of the Carter Doctrine, and they might be surprised at how you see the impact of the U.S. role.
I would start off by saying that regional dysfunction has been kind of written into the institutions of particularly the Arab world, and so this isn't to say that the kind of absence that we see at the regional security level is solely a function of America's role or American intervention, because that dysfunction predates the United States. But what we can say pretty clearly is that U.S. the predominant U.S. role in the region has shifted the kind of the focus for security thinking outside the region to the United States, and we see this, I think, most prominently in collective security terms, but also I think it has stunted the imagination of regional diplomacy and conflict prevention. We've seen this in terms of things like Libya and Syria, where regional processes are really not particularly robust and not particularly serious. And despite American efforts in the Madrid era to put this on the agenda in a kind of formalized way, something that I think is important as a precedent. The arms control and regional security talks of the '90s. There hasn't been any American leadership on that front for many years now, and the role of the United States, I think, has served to inhibit regional initiatives, and they were mostly stillborn to begin with. So I would say that the American role has aggravated some of those long-standing underlying dynamics, and has put off a kind of regional reckoning with many of these security dilemmas and security issues.
Let's hope that in the coming years, some of the initiatives that people can read about in these reports we're releasing can lead to the piecemeal but still useful, regionally rooted and incremental security architecture framework building that could maybe start to turn that tide. You can read the reports that we're talking about on the Century Foundation's website, tcf.org. The project is called Order from Ashes: New Foundations for Security in the Middle East. TCF World has been brought to you by the Century Foundation, a progressive public policy think tank that seeks to foster opportunity, reduce inequality, and promote security at home and abroad. For more information about the work that TCF does, please visit tcf.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook.